Hello and welcome to the Seneca Conservation District's Miller Conservation Farm. I'm RHassinger, wildlife technician for the Conservation District. We're here today at Miller Farm to share some insight with you on the causes and management of filamentous algae. Here at Miller Farm we have three different ponds. We're at the northernmost pond, which is the pond that we actively manage for algae. This pond is typically used for catch and release fishing and for viewing purposes, so the public and our visitors have an opportunity to visit this pond quite often. As you can see today, the pond's looking pretty good. Now about 3 or 4 weeks ago it was not so much. Now for another picture of a different pond, let's go back to the second pond, which is not quite as pristine looking. Here we are now at the middle pond at the Miller Farm. As you can see, not quite as nice looking as the one up top. This one has the rafts of filamentous algae growing on top of it. Now filamentous algae is a different type of algae. When the cells come together, they actually grow long strands, like hair. And when that happens, it'll form this mass that's been described as like wet cotton or wet wool. Now as this grows, it'll respire oxygen, but the main thing about this pond is it's a very shallow pond, which is a kind of an environment that this filamentous algae loves to grow in, 1 to 3 feet of water. So a shallow pond like this one is going to really have an aggressive growth of filamentous algae. But as that algae grows in the bottom, throughout the summer it'll respire, and as it respires it releases oxygen. And this oxygen gets trapped in these fibers in there, and probably right around early to mid-summer the oxygen will cause that algae to become buoyant, and it'll form these mats as you see in the background here and float to the surface. Not a very pretty sight, and if you're in a swimming pond or whatever, it's just not very aesthetically pleasing to the eye. Now a little bit of algae is not too bad for a healthy pond. A little bit of algae is what feeds the whole cycle. The smaller algae is eaten up by the zooplankton. The zooplankton is eaten up by little fish, and little fish are eaten up by bigger fish, and so on. So a little bit is okay. However, too much algae, as we have here, can actually cause big problems. Those mats, as they get to the top, they'll actually close off the surface of the water, and you'll lose your oxygen, atmospheric oxygen diffusion exchange, dropping down your dissolved oxygen values. In addition, when this stuff will die in the fall, and in the winter it'll drop to the bottom and start decomposing, that will use up even more oxygen, and you really don't want to go into a winter season with a low DO count. Then you start getting your winter fish kills. So we really want to keep on top of this algae before it gets into a situation like this. Now let's go back up to the front pond again and talk about watershed. As I stated, the biggest reason for excess algae growth is the nutrient intake into the pond. These nutrients in the form of nitrogen and phosphorus can cause the algal growth to exceed the capacity of the pond. The sources of these nutrients can be varied. It could be from fertilizer, either agricultural or from lawn fertilizer. It can come from malfunctioning septic systems, and of course the biggest nemesis of pond owners, ducks and geese. Now here at the Miller Pond, we do not have much impact by ducks and geese, if any at all. And the watershed that serves this pond is actually very good. We've got grass buffers around about 3/4 of the pond. We do not fertilize our grass buffers. And the woods off to the south and the west side of the pond, they do add some organic loading from the leaves, but they don't really seem to be giving us too much of a problem. The crop fields that are within the watershed are, we use cover crops on that property, and we also interseed crops within the row crops. This helps keep the water on the farm field and stops the flow of, at least mitigates the flow of surface water from the farm field into this pond. Lastly, we also have no subsurface tile drainage systems entering into the pond. As you can see, we installed an aerator in our pond, which serves a couple of purposes. The aerator, for one, will cause a disturbance within the column of the water, bringing some sediment into suspension. That sediment will actually bind with the phosphorus, making it unavailable for algal growth. Additionally, the aerator has a tendency to mix the zones of the water column, so that we do not get an anoxic water zone at the bottom of the pond, which is very important during the spring and the fall of the year. Now, for your ponds, in order to dissuade algal growth in your pond, you're going to want to maintain at least a 25 to 50 foot grass buffer zone, and do not fertilize this buffer zone. We want to keep as much of the nutrients out of that pond as we can. In addition, when you have algae in your pond, you can also take efforts to rake it out mechanically with rakes or nets. It's a short-term solution, but at least it gets it out for aesthetic purposes. This material can be moved away and used as mulch in a garden or composted, but the main thing is to get it out of the drainage area of the pond, because if it makes its way back in again, it would just start all over again. There are also various dyes and chemicals that can be used as aquicide. The dyes are used to dye the water to limit the photosynthesis activity within the pond water. Chemicals just simply kill, or algicides that simply kill the algae. Some of these chemicals that can be bought are diquat, copper sulfates, materials like that, and what they do is kill the algae. But the main thing to remember is to not do it to apply the algicides during the heat of the summer, as it's hard on fish, and to only do it to 25% of the pond at a time, leaving 2 weeks between each treatment. Now, here at Miller Farm, at this north pond here, we're going to try something new in the spring of 2021, and that is to place barley straw pods into the pond. Some studies have shown that barley straw, when it breaks down, will release hydrogen peroxide. And hydrogen peroxide has been known to have a detrimental effect on the new growth of algae. So it doesn't kill algae, it just stops the growth of new algae. So let's go take a look at one of the pods that we're going to be building and installing. We sourced some barley from a local producer here in the area, and what we've done is we've taken that barley and put it in these, I'll call them pods. You want it loosely stacked within that pod. We take cable ties and tie it together like this. We'll probably put it in another finer netting, because the last thing we want is a bunch of loose barley floating around in the pond over there. This will get put out in late winter, early spring, and like I said, as this material breaks down, it'll release that hydrogen peroxide and retard the growth of any new algae. Again, it does not kill algae, it just stops the growth of new stuff. So we'll see next summer if there's any impact by this barley straw pod. It'll be weighted down and put in areas of the pond that's not as accessible to people, so that they don't get hung up on it when they're fishing or using the pond for recreation. And after a couple of months, we'll simply pull the pod out and we'll see if we have less algae in that pond this year. So follow us on our website to see if there's going to be some more, how the findings were of this trial that we're going to put on there. In closing, the main thing to consider is to keep the nutrients out of your pond ahead of time. For if you get a big algae problem, it gets a little bit tougher to treat because it can get out of control really fast. So keep those nutrients out of your pond. If I were to do one thing with my pond at the beginning, it would be the aerator. That helps solve a lot of problems. It cleans up the pond for aesthetic purposes, keeps it mixed up, and can get some of that phosphorus out. If you have any questions, you can certainly call me at the number below. And please comment on this website. If you have anything else you'd like to see, let us know how you feel. And feel free to come out and visit the Miller Farm. We're glad to have you here. Thank you.